Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor. All right, let's start. Okay, guys, thank you for joining us again. This is going to be a great episode of the Low Carb MD podcast. I have two amazing people. And Brian Lenskis, Dr. Brian Lenskis, he's going to be really jealous. He's going to be really jealous. Hopefully he can make it. He may pop in later on. We'll see. But for now, I have the great pleasure. Two amazing people doing amazing things. First of all, we have a miracle. There's another dietitian who supports meat here today. So we're very happy to have Diana Rodgers on. You've probably seen her on Twitter at, I think it's Sustainable Dish, right?
That's correct. Yep.
And now with the book Sacred Cow, which is moving into a documentary, Sacred Cow, which I'm very excited about. And this other guy doesn't need an introduction. This is Robb Wolf, a actually personal hero of mine, somebody who's written an amazing book, Wired to Eat. I highly recommend everybody gets this book and reads it. And now we, work together with Diana on the Sacred Cow. And, just before we got on this interview, I was picking his brain about how to start a gym. So, because I'm jealous of everything that he's done and everything that he's doing. So guys, thank you so much for coming on. I know our listeners are going to be really excited about this one.
Thank you. Huge honor to be here.
Thank you.
So I guess let's start at the heart of the matter. I think the heart of the matter and the heart of this book is really that maybe meat wasn't as evil as they cut it out to be. And if you look at the impacts of the environment, particularly of, with sustainable farming practices, it could be even that certain practices can make, kind of growing meat into a carbon negative type of cycle there. Can you help me understand, who should I believe? Because Harvard says, meat's bad, it's going to make pollution, and all the methane and the cow burps and the cow farts, that's the mainstream message. And if you look, Dunkin' Donuts has Beyond Meat and McDonald's and all these places have fake meats. And there's a strong push, it seems like in the mainstream with Eat Lancet, all of these nefarious kind of, I don't want to say nefarious because probably these people mean well.
Nefarious is completely reasonable when you really dig into it. But
yeah, I'm, but people, let's take off the conspiratorial hats.
Right,
They're
right.
going to think we're crazy. I agree with you. So just how do we get in this mess? Maybe Diana, can we start? How do we get into this mess?
Well, we have a whole chapter called Meat as Scapegoat. And actually we almost named the book and film Scapegoat. And so meat is the most powerful food in our culture. It's represents a lot. And so, it's death, it's masculinity, it's red and bloody. And it's something that, traditionally people who, used it as a power position. So it's also been in Western cultures seen as something that increases lust, and so that's actually how the dietitian profession started, was out of the Seventh-day Adventist religion. And so they restricted certain foods, and meat was one of them because they felt that it
it probably rightfully does increase lust, because if you're actually healthy and functioning, you actually want to reproduce and you get kind of frisky. Yeah.
It's associated with less depression and increased testosterone, which I'd imagine, at least for men, is and it's associated with regular menstrual cycles in women. So it would just seem to make sense that, it would promote natural sexual behavior, but I'm with you.
So anyhow, so there's a lot of bias against meat in our culture. It's seen as something that we need to restrict. It's seen as Plant-based eating is promoted by celebrities as the pure way to go. There's a lot of romanticism around vegetarian cultures that's completely false. So we kind of go into the anthropology of meat a little bit in the book, and how it's represented in our culture and how it's been used as even a way of ethnic cleansing in certain cultures. But then when we look at the studies, interestingly, both from the environmental and the nutrition studies, we see just really bad methodology, and that plus bias against meat, and the purity factor, and combined with our failing health as a society and our concerns about the environment just make meat the most toxic, polarizing food there could be.
Yeah. So, walk me through how you get here, because the traditional dietetics education, it promotes whole grains. And look, I'm a board certified internist. Okay. They taught me to eat less and move more and more whole grains. So how did you, get unhypnotized? How did you wake up? Right. Because you probably, unless you walked into dietetics
I did walk in already brainwashed because I had read Robb's book before I became a dietitian. So I have to say that, I think it's really hard to unlearn things. So I was really happy that I already walked into becoming a dietitian, incredibly feisty and annoying to my
How did that go? How did that go to hear, if you quoted Robb Wolf in, the dietetics program, I'm sure they hated you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm just curious. Did you experience
and you had
hardship?
asked, it was a mess. And you had asked earlier how Robb and I met, and it's through Matt Lalonde, who is a chemist at Harvard. And I had his cell phone, so I'd be texting him like in the middle of a lecture, like, they just said folic acid and folate are the same thing, and I know that's wrong. And he'd just throw me papers like on my cell phone while I was sitting in the front row, and then I'd say that's wrong. And I was denied an internship even though I had an A in every single course, because I had 2 paleo cookbooks out there.
Where was that? I'm just curious. Do you mind if I ask? Or
the internship?
Yeah. Where did they deny you because of their bias?
So, I graduated from Simmons University in Boston. But then when you go to do your internship, unless it's folded into the school, which at Simmons it isn't. So you basically you have your graduate degree and then you have to go do this internship. And Sodexo actually sort of has a corner on, they're the largest employer of dietitians in the country. Right. And they kind of control most of the internships. And so it can be really hard if you don't want to do an internship with Sodexo to even get a placement anywhere. And so I ended up having to kind of do this weird rogue internship through Sage College that was like, you could only apply if you have a PhD or have been rejected by other internships. It was really wacky. It was really tough to work in hospitals as a dietitian when your only tool is Boost or a feeding tube, especially coming from, my perspective on everything. And so, Robb and I were friends when I was doing my internship. And so he can definitely attest to how incredibly depressing I found the whole.
There was many talking off of ledges during that time, and just like, keep your head down, get through it. You'll help more people on the backside. The people in the system right now, it's kind of too far gone. And that's not in your ability to really affect that much change, but it's tough. It's really tough.
You know what pisses me off is that we have people very commonly in social media say, look at these people. They have a book out. They have cookbooks. They have a podcast. They're just profiteering, right? Profiteering. And they don't realize how much hardship people go through. When you talk to Gary Fetke, who almost had his license taken away, when you talk to, speaking of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, right? When you talk to Tim Noakes and Jason Fung and all these people who are chronically and persistently, Gary Taubes, Nina Teicholz, they are attacked. And here you are, straight A dietitian who's refused an internship. I think it's tough because people don't understand the hardship you had to go through to do what you do. And I think that that's very commendable. I'm very happy and honored to have you on the podcast. So how did that lead to, so it led to Sustainable Dish, and how did that lead to the Sacred Cow?
So yeah, I started seeing people. I had been living on farms for the last 18 years, kind of tangentially, to my interest in nutrition, that came out of, undiagnosed celiac and then some metabolic issues and stuff like that. And I just noticed that the current dialogue is, if you want to eat better for the planet, if we're going to have, a sustainable food system moving forward, then it must be vegetarian or vegan. And so I have wanted to write this book for a really long time, and was hounding Robb to do it with me for a really long time. And it took about a whole year just to come up with the structure for the book, because it's just, there's, do you start with nutrition? Do you lead with the environment? Because the book really is mostly the environmental case. I mean, it's really easy to win the nutritional case. Like even a vegan dietitian will admit that animal products are important for human health. You're never going to win an ethical argument with, an ideological vegan. But we should be talking first about what foods are most optimal for human health, and then how can they be produced in the most sustainable way. But what the current, dialogue is out of Harvard, and actually Walter Willett is in my film. He doesn't know it, but he's in my film. What they're saying is, well, this seems to be the most ethical or environmentally sustainable method of our current broken industrial food system. So let's feed people this. That's how they're looking at it, instead of, what is ideal for humans? How are we going to fix them? How are we going to fix their health and provide the most nutrient dense food? And then, how can we make it in the most sustainable way? And it turns out that the food that's killing people is also the least environmentally sustainable food to make.
Yeah, I know monocropping and some of the practices that's done with this big agro business. I think really, if you look at the Eat Lancet, I always like the philosophy of following the money, because I think you'll get your answers when you follow the money. Who supports it? Why do they support it? What are they doing? And if you look, there's two camps: the the ideological camp, right? The Walter Willits, is people who've put their whole careers down on veganism, or maybe they have a religious sort of fanatical opinion about it. And then the other camp is industry. And so, those are the people who supported this. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that, because this is the machine we're up against. And look at what you were up against just as a person. Forget about society. As a person, you are up against, ideology and industry. Sodexo being a massive corporation. Mm-hmm. I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to hear more about the book, but I can't, this is like nagging me at the back of my head. Robb, I've met so many people who've said so many nice things. We've never had the pleasure to meet. I've watched all your lectures, of course, and just brilliant lectures. I love your take. I loved your book, Wired to Eat. And there's something to be said about mentorship here in this story that I'm sensing, right? Is that Diana, experienced all this hardship, and along the way, she had excellent mentors. This chemist from Harvard that you guys are, I guess, co-friends with, and then eventually you actually directly mentoring her and helping her out. That's a story that's, I think it's really important, because there's no way we are going to be able to win, at feeding people healthy diets. We're going to be able to win against nutritional dogma. There's no way we're going to be able to heal people if we don't have excellent mentors. And I've just heard from countless people how you've mentored them. And here's another example. So can you talk a little bit about that? You know, what, I mean, probably you're like, oh, this is just my buddy, I'm helping her out. But what do you think about mentorship? You know,
Well,
mentorship.
That's definitely been a two-way street. Like I've learned so much from Diana and her perspective on this stuff and her prescience with what needs to be done and what the issues are that need to be tackled. Like cannot overstate the importance of that. So it's definitely been this remarkable collaborative process. I have been pretty good at seeing trends. And so I co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms in the world. And when we had first founded the very first CrossFit affiliate gym up in Seattle, Washington, I told Greg Glassman, the founder of CrossFit, I said, you will have 10,000 gyms by this date. And he was like, no way, that's impossible. And I actually, it took a little bit longer because the way that CrossFit did things, a lot of gyms failed. So it took a little bit longer to get there than what I had initially thought. And from very early in this whole process, I knew that the sustainability topic was going to be really critical and important, but we had to wait until there was enough interest to be able to even make this possible. Like my wife and I in particular have been really, really early on ideas and products and stuff like that, to the tune that there just wasn't a market ready to embrace this. And each year when Diana and I would get together to go to these different conferences, she was basically like, is it time? And I'm like, not quite yet, not quite yet. And then it was about 4 years ago that I said, you know, if we get on this, I think that we're going to have a pretty good chance to do this. And then we started really thinking about an outline and took a good year to just outline the book. And it changed in a lot of ways. And we initially were going to tackle the ethical case for a meat inclusive food system, but actually ended up backing into it, as Diana alluded, looking at the health consideration first, then the environmental consideration, because understanding both the health implications and the environmental underpinnings really provides a very different framework for looking at ethics. Because if it's difficult or impossible to feed humans a diet that keeps them healthy without animal products, and if animal products properly raised may be an amazing and possibly a singular tool in mitigating a host of different climate change and ecological problems, then it really changes the ethical conversation. It's not simply a thing of, well, I just don't want to kill things. It's like, well, in a living system, all things live, all things die, you know, and so we have to have a different conversation around that. And I've definitely been lucky myself to be able to help a lot of people get going in this scene. And usually the way it progresses is folks have a health crisis. They usually turn over every stone possible within mainstream medicine, typically don't find a lot of help there. And then they start looking around on the internet and you know, for a while, places like social media, and they would find people like us. And we were fortunate in that we could provide them a very empirical process. We think you might have ABC going on, and if you do this, then XYZ might be some outcomes. And you can test that, and it's not religious doctrine, it's not mysticism, it's totally testable, quantifiable, repeatable. And so in that way, you start building both trust, and you start learning also what does work and what doesn't, and ways of communicating it. And then usually once people get healthy, they pop their head up and they say, well, what next? What's the next thing that I do? And that's where you have an opportunity to introduce folks to this idea around sustainability and the importance of our food system. And this has honestly been one of these perplexing things for both of us. And it was part of the impetus for writing the book and doing the film. We had kind of two flavors of people. One of them, we would get an email or somebody would talk to us directly and say, hey, this way of eating saved my life. It transformed everything, but I'm concerned that I'm going to destroy the planet through supporting like animal inclusive, you know, food systems. And that's a pretty big topic to unpack. And then the other possibly more interesting thing was that there are a good number of people in this kind of ancestral health space who, on the one hand, support animal products with the understanding that they're important for human health, but yet they embrace some of these socio-political things that are in a fairly direct way tied into veganism itself. So even though they may not support veganism, they support kind of global ideologies that really feed into veganism. And I know that that may not be answering your question around mentorship that much, but we've just had thousands of conversations with people about these different topics. And it was kind of Groundhog's Day where we would have this topic again and again and again. And we really went back through emails and phone conversations, questions that came up during lectures. And that was largely how we kind of put together the book and the film. And again, so much of our learning, I think, has been this collaborative process with the people that we're trying to help and trying to work with. And also, I would argue I don't want to say that Diana and I are inherently right. Like all of this stuff is up for questioning and critique and interpretation and whatnot. But I've bumped into very few people who can talk about biochemistry, non-equilibrium thermodynamics, ecology, soil health, the difference between a generation 1 versus a generation 4 nuclear reactor and what the implications are for energy density and serving a global population. So, and again, we're not like PhD level experts on any of that, but we can carry on a pretty informed conversation with all of that. And I think it's difficult to justify having a really ironclad position on any of this stuff if one isn't at least conversant on the basic topics. And this is one of the big challenges that we face, is this kind of asymmetric war that's going on. The more vegan-centric folks, they kind of do the cognitive equivalent of throwing a hand grenade over a fence. It's like, meat causes cancer, and they throw it and run away. Meat destroys the environment, and they throw it and they run away. And there's material that seems compelling to support these notions, and people will kind of read the headline, read the abstract, and they're like, oh, okay, that seems reasonable. Like we unpacked a paper that looked at water allocation as it relates to meat production versus plant food production. And the authors of the paper suggested that animal products are disproportionately, resource intensive. But then when you really read the data in the paper, what they were counting as water being used was rain falling on the earth, raising grass. You can't use it for anything else, and you certainly want it to grow grasslands, And so there was this really crazy kind of cognitive dissonance in all of that. And it's a mini PhD dissertation unpacking each one of these, 20 or 30 different subtopics. So it's an interesting process doing all this. And Diana, I mean, we've had our own mentors, Alan Savory, Will Harris. I mean, so many people that are really in that regenerative ag scene have been doing it for a long time. It was cool to be able to lean on them, because as our understanding has grown, that's great, but we were able to lean on people that are legit subject matter experts. So we didn't have to start off being experts in all this. Like, we could really lean on folks that had both the empirical and the success, because they're recommending things that actually change the world. And then also they could back it up with the scientific data. And fortunately, we're living in this time where people are actually asking questions about, like, well, what is the carbon capture and the water retention of a well-managed piece of land versus one that has just been left fallow? Because that's one of these kind of wacky ideas that come out of the vegan-centric camp, which is that we shouldn't have animals on grasslands at all. They should just be left to turn back into wildland, which is in fact never the way that it's been in the history of the earth, and is actually injurious to the land.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, again, you're echoing that the fact that there's a community involved here that it has been so valuable to bring people together and to advance some of these ideas that are really outlandish for the regular person. I mean, the people that are going to be listening to this, they're going to hear a little bit about sustainable farming. They're going to hear a little bit about the fact that we've talked about Harvard and potential issues with the data that you've mentioned. They're going to hear about the Seventh-day Adventist Church and Kellogg's and how that relates to dietetics. But I don't think they really understand this whole system. And what you've described here is the fact that we have to unpack this literal system of nutritional dogma, and this system of nutritional dogma, to the onlooker, they're like, well, I mean, like they don't get it. And I don't think they have the ability to get it, right? I mean, maybe they do if they kind of spent the time. I think most people, as you said, are just interested, what do I eat? And how bad is it? Is there what's the impact of the way I eat, right? That's what they care about, and certainly I love the approach that you guys are taking here, which is what is the best way to eat as a human? Animal meat is certainly a part of that. And from a nutritional standpoint, and Diana, I love the way you framed it. And then, okay, well, how do we do that responsibly? So Diana, do you mind tackling that a little bit? How, I know a little bit about sustainable farming. Can you help me understand a little bit, well, what are the terrible practices with regards to agriculture, both plant and animal? And what are some of these practices? I know there's a lot of farms, Paul Saladino talks about white oak pastures and, what is regenerative farming? And can you just break it down for somebody, like a lowly guy like me,
Yeah, and well, and this all wraps into the ethics as well too, because number one, I'm a mother and a dietitian and believe that especially growing children need meat. So I'm very careful to acknowledge that the system is broken, but not to vilify industrially raised meat, because for some people that's all they can access, and I still think it's better than a box of macaroni and cheese or all that. So there are certainly better and worse ways to do everything, and there's no one right answer, and everything is context specific. And so the question you were bringing up before, like the big picture, just kind of understanding all of this, is why I made the film. And that's because, the people that are going to pick up this book and really want to learn about, all the reasons why meat is vilified and, really understand all the studies, that's a very small subset of the population. But there are very persuasive films out there that are changing people's diets and, helping politicians set policy. And there hasn't been anything to push back against that. And so the film really takes people to the farms and shows regenerative practices. And so there's a couple of really big picture concepts that we illustrate in the film. And actually on sacredcow.info, I have infographics that illustrate it, because some of these are a little difficult to explain verbally, but they're much easier to understand if you're just looking at it. But if you were to imagine the African Serengeti and the large wild herd of wildebeest out there, they are not fenced in a 1 acre pasture for the entire summer season, right? They're constantly moving across the landscape, and that's better for the landscape because it gives the grazed area time to recover, regenerate. And so the animals are moving for new food, but they're also together in a tight pack for protection, which is also better for the land because it needs that intensive manure and grazing, and then a rest period right afterwards. And the predator pressure that they're under. So there might be a lion or a jaguar or something in the woods, about to leap after them. That's the other reason why they're moving so much. And so what we see in nature, we can actually replicate with cattle on farms. And so a lot of people will say, oh, the cow on grass, that's what I'm going to get. But it's actually a lot more complex than that. And it's not just cows eating grass. It's these animals need to be bunched together and intensively grazing the land, and then moved off very quickly so that land has a chance to recover. And so we as humans can almost act like the predators, but through, moving these animals with electric fencing. Some of the producers that we visit in the film do it multiple times a day. Others will do it every few days. It really just depends on the number of animals, the type of landscape we're talking about, and then we can also cull animals so that we don't have overpopulation, and we can eat them too, which is what predators have done. So it's the idea of farming mirroring nature, and nowhere in nature are there monocrop. So there's no wild 100-acre fields of corn or wheat or soy. And when you look at industrial agriculture and these monocrop fields, all the chemicals used to produce it, all the heavy equipment, there's nothing natural about that at all. Where in regenerative agriculture, we're actually increasing, the health of the land through the grazing practices, but also the wild spaces where migratory birds have habitat. So there's the Audubon Society is actually working with cattle ranchers now, and there's like Audubon certified beef, because they've realized that, you can't just, as Rob was saying, have an open pasture with no grazing animals on it. And we don't have the number of predators and wild herds of animals or large tracts of land in order to even allow it to go back to nature any longer. And so we can absolutely use cattle the same way bison or wildebeest improve the land with electric fencing and with good management. So that's the difference between regenerative agriculture and, the chemical intensive monocropping, which actually just turns, those foods into ultra processed garbage, which is, also impacting our health as well.
And you know what? Maybe an important piece to that too on the production side is that the row crop centric food model it lives and dies, and this is clearly on the more plant side, but it lives and dies by the inputs of synthetic chemical fertilizers that are themselves challenging on a number of levels, damage to a host of different organisms, not the least of which are things like bees and insects. But because of the concentrated nature of the nutrients that are provided in those scenarios, the depth of root systems are kind of non-existent. Like in a vibrant grassland, the grass roots can be 2-3 meters deep, and they sequester carbon. They hold huge amounts of water. There's a whole interplay between bacteria and fungi that mine minerals out of the deeper earth and bring it up to the surface so that you have this constant nutrient cycling. And that doesn't exist in a row crop centric model. And we're losing, our tillable soil in just massive amounts. And this is one of these very perplexing elements to this story. There is really no way to stop that process using the industrial row crop food system. The way that you halt that process is the reintroduction of some sort of grazing animals that help to normalize the soil microbiome and that whole ecological process that's been going on since like vertebrates have been on the earth. And this is one of these things that if we're talking to someone that is very, well, Diana has made the point in the book, even the folks that like behind like Impossible Burger and some things like that, they will acknowledge that the row crop food system has an expiration date on it, but yet they offer no solution to it. It's well understood that at some point, and it's kind of funny, like there's this meme that has kind of gone around that we have 60 harvests left before all of our topsoil is gone. And this is one of these things that we got in and dug and dug and dug, and Diana tracked it down to a comment that was made at the United Nations by a person talking, but it actually doesn't have any basis in science specifically to 60 harvests, but it is accurate in that we will run out of topsoil if we keep doing this stuff. And then we really are going to be in a remarkable pickle at that point. But this is some of this stuff which sounds really good on the one hand, but then when you get in and start unpacking it, it just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. But intuitively it's like this elevator pitch, like, 10-second attention span deal that sounds great, and it's very meme worthy. It's great for a quick news piece, but it doesn't really convey the nuance of the situation or the story at all. And it really doesn't direct one in a direction that would lend itself to actually offering some solutions, like suggesting that we need to reintroduce grazing animals and a wide variety of them, and that they need to be moved in a way that emulates the evolutionary biology of predator-prey interaction. Like, people have just checked out and gone to put a TikTok video up or something by the time that you get halfway into that discussion.
I think it's complex and people don't understand. They just want an answer. What do I eat and how bad is it? Right? What do I eat and how bad is it? And yeah, what do I eat? Meat from a sustainable farm. Right? And how bad is it? Not that bad. Right? I mean, that's it. What do I eat? Meat, fish, chicken, eggs, Greek yogurt, green leafy vegetables, low carb fruit. How bad is it? If you get it from regenerative, local farm, not that bad. Not that bad. Can I ask you guys a question? A little question. Let's play devil's advocate, okay? I'm the vegan, doctor here, and I'm going to say, well, with that monocropping, okay, that's going to feed the livestock, right? That's going to feed the livestock. That's where all the, that's where all the monocropping is going. So what do you say to that?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, most of our monocropping is actually going into ethanol, which the byproducts of actually go to feedlot cattle, which is interesting. So if we didn't feed all this crop residue after we harvest the corn for ethanol, if we didn't feed that to cattle, it would just sit in a pile and decompose and emit greenhouse gases and just not turn into protein. So grazing animals, ruminant animals, are uniquely able to convert food that we can't digest on land we can't farm into the perfect food for humans. And so 85% of the cattle that we raise in the US for beef right at this moment are grazing on land that we can't crop. So that's the biggest concept. That's what got us our book contract. It's understanding that our tillable land that's suitable for cropping is a very small percentage of the overall land that we have available for agriculture. And so we can graze animals on the land that's too brittle or too rocky or too slopey to farm. When we look at chicken and pork, yes, they eat 100% grain in an industrial system, but even feedlot cattle they don't live on a feedlot their whole life, which is actually, really revolutionary to a lot of people, because they think, CAFO beef, and their image is this baby cow in a feedlot, and that's not how it happens. So all cattle start out on grass, and then if they're finished on a feedlot, they do get some grain, but if you look at their overall lifespan, only about 10% of their diet is actually grain. The rest is grass and other byproducts from ethanol and brewers spent yeast from the brewing industry and the alcohol industry. They're actually converting food that has no other use to us, and they're making it into beef, which is pretty magical. So the feed conversion rate, so the FCR for beef, is about 2.5 pounds of grain to 1 pound of beef. So when you're actually looking at the total grain input for beef. So I would argue as a dietitian that it's better to eat 1 pound of steak versus 2.5 pounds of corn.
Yeah, I concur. Well, let's go down a little bit. I have so many questions to ask, one of which is, how much of this is all really things we're not paying attention to? If you're concerned about the environment, would it be better to focus on both food waste and fossil fuel emissions, right? I don't see a lot of vegans talking about food waste and fossil fuel emissions. So how much of methane is actually from cows?
Well, it's interesting, and this is one of the really important things to get right, is that biogenic sources of greenhouse gases really do need to be treated differently than what comes out of, mining carbon sources that have been underground for hundreds of millions of years and releasing them at a pretty rapid clip. When we look at, well, this is a possibly interesting example. It's got to be 5-6 years ago. There was an article that appeared in the journal Physics talking about the fact that they discovered that shellfish on the ocean floor emit enormous amounts of methane. And then they made the point that termites emit enormous amounts of methane. And there was kind of some hand-wringing around this and some suggestions that maybe we should cull all of the shellfish out of the ocean floor to limit greenhouse gas emissions, with the overall point being that we're going to save life on Earth by destroying life on Earth. And this is where this idea, this focus specifically on just greenhouse gas emissions, is actually really dangerous. And the way that folks are looking at it is very myopic. When we're in a life cycle process, sun falls on the earth, plants via photosynthesis take carbon out of the atmosphere, turn it into carbohydrates and other molecules. Those plants get eaten by different types of animals. Those animals get eaten by different types of animals. There is methane that's released as part of the cellulosic fermentation process that occurs with not just, again, cattle, but things like termites and peat bogs and all kinds of stuff. And both methane and carbon dioxide make its way back into the atmosphere. The carbon dioxide is directly part of the carbon cycle, and it will make its way back into plants and get turned into topsoil as part of the kind of soil building process that occurs in grasslands. The methane has about a 10-year life cycle in the atmosphere as methane, but it will get photodegraded due to the interaction of ultraviolet radiation into carbon dioxide and water. And then again, it re-enters the carbon cycle. And we had a really fascinating natural experiment that occurred during COVID, where the numbers of grazing animals did not change during this 6 going on 8-month period of global lockdown, but our transportation sector was largely shut down. And we saw that greenhouse gas emissions absolutely plummeted. So your point is well made that we really aren't seeing much focus on the transportation sector as really if there should be some alarms spinning and something that we want to look at, it should be there. But instead, there was a doubling down of focus on this area. And there's a PNAS paper that makes the case that if we removed all animal husbandry all animal product production out of the U.S. food system, total greenhouse gas emissions would reduce by 2.6%, Diana, 2.8, 2.6. It would lead to much larger amounts of nutrient deficiencies. People would tend to overeat because they're not eating adequate protein. There would be all kinds of other knock-on health effects. And we weren't able to do the life cycle analysis on this, but just in very broad brushstrokes, we looked into what is the carbon footprint of all of the needles and syringes and tubing involved with dealing with type 2 diabetes. It is enormous, just massive, but nobody is really talking about those things, and this is why we kind of bounce back and forth between the titles Sacred Cow and Scapegoat, because it's been this one thing that folks are looking at, and they look at this topic in a very myopic way. And ironically, it's a largely white, wealthy, vegan-centric group of folks that are telling the rest of the world, including the developing world, you guys should not have access to energy to lift yourselves out of abject poverty. And you also should not be allowed access to the nutrient-dense foods that provides a disproportionate benefit both for health and cognitive development so that your children can live a better life than you will. And so it's this remarkable bit of, in this time where people are talking about privilege and equality and access, we have a small group of people that are telling the rest of the world that they should eat and live in a way that we know to be absolutely suboptimal, and all based off of incredibly dubious science when we really take the full accounting of like the climate change, perspective.
Yeah, I just want to echo some of the things you said here. One is that a very heavy meat-based, low carbohydrate, ketogenic or paleo diet is literally curative for many people. Not curative, but at least will put diabetes into remission, okay, in a significant amount of people who adopt them. Will have a calorie for calorie impact on glycemia, meaning that meat can truly reverse or remit the glycemia associated with diabetes. And there was just a JAMA article yesterday which showed that the cost of diabetes is $5,000 a year for just the prescription drugs. Just the prescription drugs. And it's $2,000 a year, right, for out of pocket for these drugs. So it's an insane, this is an unsustainable model. Eating a bunch of, soy protein and, granola bars, right? Kind bars from cats and, as part of the Kind Bar board of directors. Eating these foods, who all support Eat Lancet, by the way, all of these companies that make granola bars, cereals, they all support Eat Lancet, and they all have some financial interest, I think, in making those, justifying their support, or maybe not justifying in the face of their support. But in any case, I don't think that these foods will certainly exacerbate diabetes. We see it on CGMs. We see it in real time. Whereas meat literally reverses at least the symptoms of diabetes, particularly the glycemia. And our current meat consumption has dropped. Red meat consumption has dropped. I don't think we can continue to blame red meat. And, the other part of this, which you talked about, which is the social injustice, particularly to those who are not as affluent. I've seen studies in children showing that a meat intervention literally raises IQ, right? That eggs literally raise IQ. So if we're talking about social injustice, healthcare disparities, racial disparities, we really have to be talking about meat. And let me just juxtapose this. They have literally done studies. It's called the Faith DM study, which literally took the most brittle diabetic who were poor and had no access to food and gave them fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. And for 6 months. And they measured outcomes. And what happened? Not one marker of improvement on their diabetes or weight. Their weight didn't improve. Their diabetes didn't improve. Whereas we have trials with meat supplementation that literally raises IQ in children. Okay, and low-carb, meat-based diets like that of Verda and Atkins have been shown to improve diabetes. So I think everything you're saying is absolutely right. And what is the cost? Forget about the environmental costs that you're mentioning. Look at just prescription drugs. We're talking about $5,000 a year to the system. So you have a cheerleader right here, because everything you're saying is in absolute agreement. I agree completely.
Well, and this is something that Diana has been championing a lot, because one of the masterful marketing strokes that like the Eat Lancet type folks have been using, things like Meatless Monday and not no meat.
I'm in New York.
But less
I'm
meat
in New York,
and,
where they actually have Meatless Monday. And not only do they have Meatless Monday, they have a law that says that every single hospital has to offer a plant-based option. Do you know how many hospitals in New York have a low carbohydrate diet on their menu?
I would assume zero.
Zero. The ADA guideline that this is a medical nutrition therapy, there is 0 hospitals in the state of New York, whereas we have a law mandating that we have to have a plant-based diet. There's something wrong.
Well, and what, Diana, you dug this up, so you can unpack it better than I can.
Yeah, I mean, we cover this in the film and in the book. We're calling out Meatless Monday specifically, because in New York City, as you know, 70% of those kids are low income or homeless. And there's never been a study showing that pulling meat away from kids in need will lead to better outcomes in any way. And it's also, there's nothing showing that this is better for the environment. So, we firmly both.
Here's the thing. Let's just be honest. Mm-hmm. When you give meat to young children in interventional trials, they get better.
Yeah.
They do better. their IQ improves.
Yes. Yeah.
So
So we
this is
cite that
harm.
study. Yeah.
This is harm.
So our position is that it's incredibly discriminatory to low-income people to have those in a position of privilege who have the ability to go get their supplements and all and have you know, these expensive vegan prepared diets, you know, to be forcing their ideology on people who just need nutrition, basic nutrition, is highly, you know, just mean. And that's where sometimes I get into arguments with people in the grass-fed beef, you know, regenerative farming community, because they'll say, well, it has to be grass-fed beef or nothing. And I'm like, no, it needs to be healthy first.
Yeah.
And we can do it better when it comes to food production.
Because a family living at the margins, they would be better off eating conventional meat, eschewing grains, refined carbohydrates and whatnot. Like, the children will be better off, the family will be better off. And then when they're able to better their financial situation, then by all means support local decentralized pasture-based systems. But this is where we maybe should have tackled this the way that the vegans did, where we just lie about a number of things so that you have this kind of greenwashing consistent story and there's no hiccups or abnormalities. But we've had a fair amount of cranky blowback from the really elitist regenerative ag scene, because we don't 100% vilify the current, you know, industrial meat system as it is, because there are people that would do better from a health perspective to eat that meat than to not. And we simply don't have the options there yet. There is no place on the earth that grain finished meat is cheaper than grass-fed meat other than the United States. And it is only an artifact of our oblique farm subsidy systems and all that. Like, if you go to Australia and you want a piece of grain finished meat, it'll cost you 30 or 40% more than grass finished meat, because that's the real numbers everywhere else. Like, and there's all kinds of weird things like the global reserve currency status of the US and all these other things that really will make people check out when you talk about that. But we live in this artifact world in which the US food system is broken in so many ways. It's hard to even get a handle on which tail you want to go after first. But yet this broken food system, similar to a broken healthcare system, is being farmed out wholesale to the whole world. And what's really interesting is that I would say that the people who are more on this kind of vegan-centric model politically are probably against big corporations and all that type of stuff. What you are supporting in the row crop centric vegan, you know, friendly food system is 100% these mega corporations that are supranational in status. They wield more power oftentimes than governments. There was a Forbes piece that made the case that the vegan agenda with these you know, fake meats and the greenwashing of vegan based foods, that it supports only big business. It's not helping local decentralized economies. It's doing nothing to diversify our food systems. It's basically creating another layer of monocropping on top of the actual physical process of monocropping.
Yeah, you know, it's look, if you follow the money, right? We say this a lot on this podcast, follow the money. Who benefits, right? Who is it that benefits from Meat Lancet? It's not the children and their IQ. Okay, it's certainly not the health of the diabetics and pre-diabetics, okay, which is more than 60% of the population. It's certainly not local farmers, right? So who benefits? Big corporations. Kind Bar is happy to have that. Kellogg's is happy to have it. You know, all these soy protein and plant-based products are very happy to have this happen. Okay, certainly Big Foods, Nestle, Kellogg's, you know, Quaker, all these companies, right? They're very happy to have this. And certainly the governments, Governments are very happy to have this, and people with a vegan agenda who have a moral, kind of religious, dogmatic view. I don't see the average person benefiting from this, and certainly I think there's a harm. So I'm with you guys, 110%.
Yeah, Beyond
Well,
Burger
that's three of us.
is the one of the main sponsors of Meatless Monday, which, you know, not only is taking meat away from kids just one day a week, but it's also allowing all kinds of really bad propaganda, anti-meat propaganda in the schools. So sending the message every day to these young kids that meat is bad. And interestingly, Beyond Burgers per pound are twice as expensive as organic grass-fed beef.
Wow.
So, I mean, that the money is in the processing and conversion of the raw materials into something new, not in, you know, raising a cow. And, you know, when you hear like meat industry, you know, that's not the farmers raising the cattle. That's, you know, those are the meat packers that are basically profiting, but not the producers of the meat.
You know, is there something to be said about finding a way around, you know, I've seen people go directly to the farmers, cow shares, stuff like that. Is there like something easy? Like we have our podcast listeners are basically people on low carb diets, ketogenic diets, you know, maybe just people interested in general health. You know, what's an easy thing they can do to help? You know, how can they help besides buying the book, watching the documentary? Guys, please buy the book. Please watch the documentary. A lot of good people behind this, and people who've gone through hardship. I mean, in immense hardship, years of hardship to their professional careers, have been attacked, been vilified, to bring these things to you. So please support them. But what's something easy they can do? You know, what is something like simple?
Well, one thing is just to plug, but I am still raising money for the Impact campaign, where I can take this to schools and universities and do screenings and Q&As. That's something that I'm still working on. But we do have a nutrition, you know, save yourself and save the planet, basically diet protocol in the back of the book called Eat Like a Nutrivore. So when you take the emotion out of diet and you just look at straight nutrient density of foods, what foods are going to give you the best bang for your calorie dollar, it happens to look a whole lot like a paleo type diet, lowish carb type diet. So we give people a roadmap for that, and then also resources on how to source better meat. We actually have a course too that Rob and I just finished called Meat Curious, and that's for folks who maybe were vegetarian or vegan, or just still, you know, really maybe overly concerned, not overly concerned, but, you know, rightly concerned about the environmental impact or health issues surrounding red meat. So Rob and I basically just explain it all in like a 10-hour broken up into digestible sections course. So save yourself first, please, to be, you know, not a burden on our healthcare system. And, you know, when COVID happened, so the book was already done. And I was writing some slides out for a presentation, and, you know, there's quite a few non-food related things that we advocate for in the book, just based on our very similar ideologies around life,
Resilience.
living in general. And, you know, don't, you know, have a savings account so that, you know, you're not stuck when, you know, a recession happens. Boom, what's happening? You know, keep yourself metabolically healthy. What were some of the other ones, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it was don't have debt, have community, have some extra food on hand. It's kind of funny. We were debating about it because, and again, this was way pre-COVID that we did this. I mean, a year before COVID. And we were kind of talking, I'm like, this is a little bit of a doomsday bunker, like prepper manifesto, but we're like, well, this is all really valid stuff. And then the book was just spinning up to be released when COVID really hit. and it kind of made us look like the smartest people in the room. But this is just stuff that people should be doing every day, all the time. And Diana's point is really well made. Like, the most critical thing for anybody to do is to get your own metabolic health buttoned up first. Like, you're going to be less susceptible to COVID and influenza and to bacterial infections and getting hit by a bus and, and on and on and on. Like, there's only upside to that. And then once you do get your metabolic health squared away, then you can start looking around. This is kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs type thing. Once you get your basic world needs addressed, then you do start looking around and you ask some questions about, like, what can I do from a legacy perspective? Like, what can I do that's going to improve the lives of our children and grandchildren? And that is where we start looking at how can we support local decentralized food systems and really put our dollars in that place. And, ironically, one of the greatest challenges to having better access to meat, more people entering the scene, is actually the slaughter and processing side. There's effectively a monopoly on that, and it's very difficult for the small time operator to just get their animals into a slaughter and butchering facility. The big players will pay for access to these facilities such that it's kind of like a competitive inhibition of a drug on a receptor site. Like, they make it inaccessible for people to get in there. And Senator Tom Massey, I believe, of Kentucky, has a bill that's still gaining some traction called the Prime Act, which would make it much easier for local processing to occur. And this would just open things up so much. During COVID, we saw these potential food shortages, particularly around meat, because these processing centers are just a ideal environment for COVID transmission. And we have comparatively few of them. They tend to be very, very large, but I think we're discovering huge cities may not be as smart of an idea as what we once thought. Huge monopolistic processing plants may not be as good of an idea. It looks efficient on the one hand until you see, the challenges of dealing with pandemics and whatnot. And having an eye towards how folks can support decentralization of their economic and food sovereignty is a really, really good idea.
I got a quick question for you. Organ meat is cheap, yes or no?
Yeah.
Eat it, or is it actually cheap? Yeah.
Yeah, it's cheap.
We export most of it actually to places like Mexico, where they still value it.
And then another thing, we have this is just total. I got no affiliation. I was just about to do a local meat share. They call it a local meat share. How do I know? The one I'm looking at is Walden Local. Is that, how do I know this is not some meat packing front?
Well, I know Charlie, the head of Walden, the founder of it. So I can tell you that they are legit.
Got it. I'm going to buy it now. I'm going to get my share now then. I mean, there's something like that, something simple that people can do. I mean, besides get metabolically healthy, we talk about that 130 episodes in, we're getting people metabolically healthy. I'm thinking the next step, and I'm thinking about just like me, like right now I go to the supermarket, if I can get grass-fed, I get grass-fed, but what's the step further? Is that going to a local meat share? What is it?
I mean, definitely supporting a farmer directly so that the money goes into their pocket instead of a middleman. So, if you have access to a freezer where you can, split a cow share with another family and actually, give the money straight to the producer, that's going to be ideal. But Rob and I are also realists, and so we understand that that's not where we're at, and that's not how we're going to make major change. Major change is going to come from companies like Applegate and McDonald's and the major meat companies that are actually, can even a small change by them is gigantic.
Enormous. And that's something that folks need to be prepared for. When change happens, don't shoot it in the head. These big players can make money off of a regenerative system. And we saw some of this happen when General Mills purchased or acquired Epic Bar. People freaked out and if a big player acquires some element of this regenerative system, by all means, let's hold their feet to the fire. Let's scrutinize them and make sure that they're maintaining the same standards and whatnot. But if change happens, like the benefits, or some of the benefits of our modern world is the distribution and logistics that we have are just stunning. It is absolutely amazing. What we would likely benefit from is more decentralization in production, and then taking advantage of all of these amazing logistics channels and distribution channels that we have. And that can all function in a regenerative system. But one of the other challenges that we have is that when change does actually happen, Diana, I'm blanking on, there was something recently where somebody big, whether it was a McDonald's or maybe a Wendy's or something like that, they were going to go 100% like grass-fed or pastured meat or something.
Oh, no, that's the Burger King's feeding, I don't know, something to make the cows burp less.
Well, this was a different thing, because that's actually bullshit. But this was something that was actually good. It was like, this is a good thing, and people lost their minds, and they have some sort of an idea that like this wistful like hippie notion that like regenerative ag means that your farmer drives up to your front door and drops off your food. Like, then we are getting out of a sustainable story, because it's incredibly inefficient to do that. And this is again where we would most benefit from both the economies of scale that we have, but sourcing in an entirely different way. Mm-hmm. But that bit of nuance makes people crazy. Like it's like they can't hold these two truths in their head at the same time. So while we are advocating and pushing for regenerative ag to grow and expand, we also need to be ready that when it changes, it's not necessarily that Walmart will go away or Costco will go away, but the offerings they have will improve, and the relationship that they have with the producers will be different than what it is now.
Yeah, I think the problem is we've been burned so many times. I know people were a little upset about how the formulation changed with Epic. Certainly, if you look at Atkins, how it deteriorated, the Atkins brand deteriorated over time. And, people are looking at, love Mark Sasson and Daily Apple and all, and Primal Kitchen was bought, and we're all kind of seeing what will happen to this Primal Kitchen brand. So I think you're right. It's just, people want to knee jerk and say this is bad, and people did do that. But we just got to wait and see, I guess, and hope that people will try to maintain the ethics that got them there and ideas.
And if these big brands lose their way with these acquisitions, then by all means, let's pull out the pitchforks and hold their feet to the fire. But you can't just assume that it's a bad thing out of the gate and then abandon ship. Otherwise, we're in this Groundhog's Day where we're always just waiting for the next small thing to kind of go big, and then we abandon it once it goes big.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. Listen, this has been absolutely, absolutely amazing. So many things that I know our listeners are going to love. Brian is going to be so upset that he wasn't here for this one. I'm sure he had some sort of patient emergency, because I can't even contact him now, but I'm sure there was something going on. Diana Rodgers and Robb Wolf here, guys, bringing you an amazing book and some documentary that I'm really looking forward to. When is the release on the documentary?
I'm glad you asked. So we're actually going to be, I'm working with a distributor now who's going to get it on, the mainstream platforms, but we're going to be offering it for free for 1 week this fall, probably sometime in October or November. And it'll be available through my website, thesacredcow.info. So it's sacredcow.info. So folks can sign up for my newsletter and be first in line to register for when that happens. And it'll be available only for 1 week, and then we're going to take it away. But we did want to give people a chance to see it, sooner than later. So, so stay tuned for that.
That's amazing. I can't wait. Robb, are you working on anything cool? Anything else cool?
Ken Ford from the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition wrote me into a keto and sarcopenia book. And if he was not my personal hero, I would probably find a length of electrical cable and hang myself right now, but I'm working on that. So it was amazing doing Sacred Cow, but it was a lot of work. And like I just want to say something really quickly too. Diana has sacrificed on a personal level in a way that most people will never ever know, but like she literally bled for both of these projects, and just in a way that is jaw-dropping in the commitment and personal sacrifice, and cannot say enough accolades for her just fucking tenacity on getting this thing done and trying to help the world and do the right thing again and again and again. There have been multiple situations where she could have chosen a path that would have been easier for her personally, for her financially, and she stuck to her guns. And there's a bunch of story. Maybe we'll do a documentary around your process that has gone into this. That would be a hell of a story to tell at some point. But I just can't say enough good about what she did. Just in constant awe of her work ethic and her just integrity in taking on projects like this.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys have done, and both of you doing amazing things. At probably, I don't think people understand. They see us on social media, they see us, maybe putting out these books or movies or whatever it is, and they don't realize that sometimes it comes with intense criticism, people questioning your judgments, your motives, and they don't realize how hard it is to say something that bucks a convention when you know that it's true and you know that it's just, but the kind of the whole system is against it. So I commend both of you guys, and I'm really honored to have you guys on and consider you guys colleagues and friends and mentors and all of the above. So thank you.
Thank you. And if you want to talk about opening a gym, let's do that sometime soon.
All right. I think that's it. Are we there? Yeah, I think we're good. Oh no, am I still recording? Shit. Jack, edit that out. Hold on. There we go. Stop.
I have